Welcome to the debate. Today we are going to slow things down just a little bit. We are stepping into the classroom. Imagine you are sitting in a university seminar preparing for an English literature discussion. We are going to explore how stories change over time and, well, specifically how we tell stories about girls and women.
It is a pleasure to be here, and this is indeed a perfect topic for a seminar discussion. We're looking at comparative children's literature. Now, that sounds complicated, but it really just means placing two stories side by side to see how they are similar and how they're different.
Exactly. And to do this, we have some excellent source material. We have a traditional German fairy tale collected by the Brothers Grimm called Snow White and Rose Red. And we have a modern classic, a picture book by Robert Munsch called The Paper Bag Princess.
We also have some academic theory to guide us. We will be looking at a text by Maria Nikolajeva regarding intertextuality. And we will be using definitions from a student worksheet on gender and agency.
So here is the central question for our debate today. Do modern stories simply replace outdated traditional stories because they are, well, better? Or do these stories exist in a conversation with one another? I am going to take the position found in the academic worksheet. I'll argue that modern stories like The Paper Bag Princess are essential because they show female agency. They correct the old passive ideas found in traditional tales.
And I will take the position of the literary theorist. I come at it from a different way. I believe that traditional stories are far more complex than we give them credit for. I'll argue that you cannot simply say the new story is good and the old one is bad. In fact, I will argue that you cannot even understand the modern story unless you respect the traditional one first.
That is a bold claim. Let's get into our position statement. I want to start with a very important definition from our seminar worksheet. The word is agency.
A crucial term for university literary study. So, how are we defining it?
The worksheet defines agency as the ability to act and make decisions. It is about having power over your own story. When I look at children's literature, this is, for me, a main measure of quality. In the modern book, The Paper Bag Princess, the protagonist is Elizabeth. She demonstrates high agency. Her castle is smashed, her clothes are burned, and her Prince Ronald is kidnapped by a dragon. Does she cry? Does she wait? No.
She certainly does not wait.
Now, contrast this with the traditional idea of the traditional princess, represented in our worksheet as Snow White. The worksheet highlights that the traditional character waits for help and is eventually saved by a prince. This represents a passive gender role, the idea that girls should be quiet and waiting. My position is that for a modern student, the Munch story is superior because it teaches girls to act rather than to sleep.
That is a compelling argument, and I can see why you prioritize agency. However, I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it relies on a generalization. You are looking at a summary of Snow White from the worksheet, right? But we have the actual text of the Brothers Grimm story, Snow White and Rose Red. And when we look closely at the text, the passive female argument starts to fall apart.
How so? I mean, they're domestic, quiet girls, are they not?
They are domestic, yes, but they are not helpless. In the Grimm text, Snow White and Rose Red are not sleeping in a glass coffin waiting for a kiss. They're, running about in the meadows, they gather berries, they take care of their mother, and most importantly, they interact with the wild world. They are not afraid. This brings me to my core argument, which is based on Maria Nikolajeva's theory of intertextuality.
Okay. Could you define that term for our listeners who might be new to literary theory?
Of course. Intertextuality is the idea that no text exists in a vacuum. Literature is a dialogue, a conversation. Nikolajeva argues that we shouldn't judge old stories as simply outdated. Instead, we should look at how the new story talks to the old story. My position is that The Paper Bag Princess is a replacement, not a replacement. And if we lose the complexity of the Grimm tales, we lose the foundation of that conversation.
I accept that literature is a conversation, but I want to look at how that conversation happens, specifically regarding behavior. Let's move into our core debate. I want to talk about active versus passive behavior.
A classic comparison point.
Let's look at the dragon scene in Robert Munch's book. This is the height of active behavior. Elizabeth reaches the dragon's cave. She grabs the knocker and she bangs on the door. When the dragon tells her to go away, she doesn't leave. She manipulates him. She uses psychology.
She challenges his vanity.
Precisely. She asks, "Is it true that you are the smartest and fiercest dragon in the whole world?" She tricks him into burning up 50 forests. Then she tricks him into flying around the world in 10 seconds. Munch writes that when the dragon got back, he was too tired to talk, and he lay down and went straight to sleep. Elizabeth defeats the monster using only her brain. In the worksheet's terms, she is the rescuer. Prince Ronald is the victim. This completely reverses the expectation.
It is a brilliant scene, and it is very funny. But I must challenge the idea that this is the only kind of active behavior. You described the traditional characters as passive or waiting, but let's look at the evidence in Snow White and Rose Red. These girls also encounter a monster, or rather, a grumpy magical creature, the dwarf.
But do they defeat him, or do they just sort of endure him?
They actually rescue him, repeatedly. This is agency, just of a different kind. There is a scene where the mother sends them to gather firewood. They find the dwarf with his beard caught in a tree split. He is jumping about like a dog tied to a rope. He glares at them with fiery red eyes and he screams for help. Snow White doesn't run away. She tries to pull the beard out. When that fails, she pulls her scissors out of her pocket and cuts the end of the beard.
She cuts the beard. That is an action I admit.
It happens 3 times. Later, the dwarf is tangled in a fishing line, about to be pulled into the water by a big fish. The girls hold him fast and cut him free. Later still, an eagle seizes the dwarf. The girls hold on to the little man and pull against the eagle until the bird lets go. I mean, these are not passive girls sleeping in a tower. They are physically struggling with eagles and trees to save a life, even the life of a very ungrateful dwarf.
That is an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. You mentioned the dwarf is ungrateful. In the text, he screams at them, calling them clumsy creatures and toadstools. The girls just keep helping him. Isn't that a problem? Elizabeth fights back against the dragon. Snow White and Rose Red just politely accept the abuse. That feels like a good girl gender role that we might want to move away from.
I see that interpretation. But consider the bear. They also interact with a large black bear. The text says they tugged his hair with their hands and took a hazel switch and beat him. They played tricks on him. When the bear growled, they just laughed. This is playful, sure, but it shows they are not terrified of male strength. They manage it. They control the domestic space. So Elizabeth fights a dragon to destroy it, Snow White and Rose Red fight in gratitude with kindness, and they tame a bear with playfulness. Both are active.
I see the distinction, but let's talk about the ultimate goal of that activity. This leads us to our second point of contention, the marriage plot and independence.
The endings of the stories. This is usually where the biggest differences lie.
In Snow White and Rose Red, the reward for all that kindness and bear cutting is, well, it's marriage. The bear turns into a handsome man clothed in gold. He says, "I am a king's son." Snow White marries him. Rose Red marries his brother. They share the treasure. It fits the pattern described in the worksheet perfectly. A prince saves her at the end. Or at least a prince validates her. It supports traditional ideas about girls that the goal of life is to find a rich husband.
And the paper bag princess?
It completely rejects that pattern. This is why it is so important for ESL students to read. It offers a new cultural script. Elizabeth rescues Ronald. She opens the door looking messy, wearing a paper bag. And what does Ronald say? He says, "Elizabeth, you are a mess. You smell like ashes. Your hair is all tangled, and you are wearing a dirty old paper bag." He tells her to come back when she is dressed like a real princess.
It's a shocking moment of rudeness.
It is, but Elizabeth's response is the definition of empowerment. She says, "Ronald, your clothes are really pretty and your hair is very neat. You look like a real prince, but you are a bum." And the text concludes, they didn't get married after all. She dances off into the sunset alone. She chooses independence over a bad marriage.
It is a fantastic ending. I agree it is empowering. But I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that this makes it better than the traditional story. In fact, I would argue that Munch is using a technique called parody.
Referencing the Nicolaeva text again?
Yes. Nicolagia explains that for a parody to work, the reader must know the original pattern. Think about it. Why is it funny that Elizabeth calls Ronald a bum? Why is it so satisfying that they don't get married?
Because we expect them to get married.
Stories like Snow White and Rose Red. The humor and the power of the paper bag princess rely entirely on the existence of the traditional fairy tale. It is a conscious use of patterns, as Nicolaeva writes. Elizabeth's independence is a reply to Snow White's marriage. If you erase the Grimm story, Elizabeth's choice loses its revolutionary power. It just becomes a story about a breakup.
That is a very sophisticated way to look at it. You are saying the modern story, it kind of stands on the shoulders of the traditional story.
Precisely. It is retrospective intertextuality. It looks back.
Okay, I can concede that the humor relies on the reference. But let's move to our third point, cultural values. Even if the literary reference is clever, what about the values we're teaching? The worksheet asks us to consider gender roles, what society expects men or women to do.
And what values do you see in the Grimm text that concern you?
Well, look at the description of the girl's virtues in the Grimm text. It says, Snow White was more quiet and gentle. It says Snow White sat at home with her mother and helped her with her housework. Rose Red is a bit more active, but they are both defined by how good and neat they are. They clean the bear's fur, they keep the cottage shiny. The worksheet asks, what does Snow White suggest about how girls should behave? The answer seems to be, stay inside, clean the house, be quiet. The paper bag princess suggests girls can be messy, loud, and fierce. Do we really want to keep teaching the housework value?
I think we have to be careful not to dismiss domestic values as simply bad. There is a beautiful concept in the Grimm story called symbiosis, living together in harmony.
Harmony with the housework.
Harmony with everything. Look at the text. The mother, the girls, the lamb, the dove, and the bear all sit around the fire. The text says it was not long before they grew quite at home. There is a deep connection to nature. The animals in the forest trust them. The deer and the birds stay near them. Nicolaeva mentions that children's literature is a playground for different discourses.
Meaning different ways of seeing the world?
Yes. In Snow White and Rose Red, the value is community. Everyone lives together. The mother, the girls, the future husbands. It is a warm, safe circle. In The Paper Bag Princess, the value is individualism. Elizabeth walks away alone. She is happy, but she is alone. My argument is that students need to see both. We can appreciate the community aspect of Grimm without destroying it, while also celebrating the independence of Munch.
That is a fair point. We don't have to choose one great master of values. We can look at them as different options.
Exactly. Nicolaeva makes the point that in children's literature, there is no single great master like Shakespeare is for adults. There is just this web of stories. Snow White and Rose Red offers a different kind of strength, the strength of kindness, endurance, and keeping a warm home in a cold winter. That is valuable too.
I suppose if we only taught the paper bag princess, we might raise a generation that is very independent, but perhaps struggles with the symbiosis or community aspect.
And if we only taught Grimm, we might raise a generation that is very communal, but lacks the agency to leave a bad situation.
Touché. It seems we are finding some middle ground here.
I think so. Complexity often requires multiple perspectives to fully appreciate.
Let's move to our conclusion and wrap this up for our students. We have covered a lot of ground today. We looked at agency, intertextuality, and the conflict between traditional and modern values.
We certainly did.
From my perspective as we close, I want to emphasize that for a university student learning English, identifying agency is a key analytical tool. The Paper Bag Princess is a perfect text to see this in action. Elizabeth breaks the social rules. She challenges the dragon and the prince. It challenges the idea that girls must always be polite to be heroes. It is really a story of liberation.
And from my perspective, I want to emphasize that comparative literature asks us to look at the relationship between texts. Snow White and Rose Red offers a different kind of strength. By reading it, we understand the joke in Munch's story. We understand what Elizabeth is rebelling against.
So the consensus seems to be that the modern story acts as a reply to the traditional story, not just an eraser of it.
Correct. It is a dialogue. And as students, you are now part of that dialogue.
Speaking of students, we have a task for you. Before you finish your study session today, look at the short writing task on your worksheet. You need to write 100 to 150 words comparing Snow White and Elizabeth.
Use the sentence starters provided. Snow White is shown as, and Elizabeth is different because. Try to decide which story you find more empowering, but remember to explain why using the evidence we discussed today.
Do you prefer the Dragon Slayer or the Bear Tamer? That is up to you to decide. Thanks for joining us for this seminar discussion on the debate.
Happy reading.